What is art without the muse? Many of art history's most famous works are depictions of women. But who were these women? Do they have their own stories to share with the world? Hello, I'm Grace Anna, host of Art Muse, a podcast that aims to reshape the ways in which we interpret well-known works of art by paying dues to the women whose images have been immortalized, but whose names and stories have been wrongfully overlooked. While these women's faces are familiar to viewers around the world, their identities have been largely forgotten. Each episode of Art Muse focuses our attention on the female muse, sharing their lives and important legacy. Together, we will appreciate these works of art from a new perspective, through the eyes of the women whose image stares back at us. Art Muse is available for streaming on all listening platforms. We look forward to sharing with you the life stories of the women behind some of the world's most important works of art.
Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. As we recognize Women's History Month, I will be sharing with you the stories of 3 remarkable women throughout the month of March: Ida Lupino, Lucille Ball, and today's star, Mary Pickford. All of these women have given such incredible contributions to history as the strong women they were, so I'm extremely honored to share their stories with you. Let's dive right into the life of the legendary Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford was born in Toronto as Gladys Louise Smith on April 8, 1892, to parents John and Charlotte. By the time she was 3 years old, she was already the big sister of a little sister named Lottie and a little brother named Jack. I'm going to refer to little Gladys as Mary throughout her story so we don't get too confused. Mary wasn't born into a privileged life, far from. Her father John was a severe alcoholic and had a difficult time holding down a job as a result of his alcoholism. The stress of not having a steady income to support his wife and 3 small children got to be a little too overwhelming for him. So instead of trying to clean up and go to work, he just left. He left when Mary was 3 and her younger siblings were just a toddler and an infant. Only 3 years later, when Mary was 6 years old, her father would be dead. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage. She later said as an adult, quote, "I can close my eyes and still hear that scream of mothers at the moment father passed on," end quote. Charlotte had been caring for him at the end, because although John was not a great husband and he had chosen the bottle over her and the children, Charlotte still loved him. And now she knew she was absolutely on her own raising the children. Charlotte had taken in seamstress jobs after John left, so that was the family's sole source of income. And now she was in a great state of grief. It was going to be very difficult for her to work the hours needed to put food on the table and care for the children in the household. So Mary became the head of the family the moment her father died. She would care for her younger siblings, cook, and keep up with the household chores. She was 6 years old. Lost in incredible grief, Charlotte even agreed to hand Mary over to a wealthy doctor and his wife after they offered to adopt her and provide her with a good life. But when the time came for Charlotte to leave Mary at the doctor's home, when Mary realized what was happening, she asked her mother if she didn't want her anymore. Charlotte explained to her little girl that she could never give her what the doctor could, that this was good for her. But Mary told her mother that she would rather have nothing as long as she could be with her family. Mary never wanted her family to be apart. Once through the worst of the grief of losing her husband, Charlotte realized she had to step up and do something. She couldn't continue making her child be a parent and household manager. Charlotte opened up their home to boarders to make a little extra money. One of those boarders was a stage manager at a local theater, and he really liked what he saw in 7-year-old Mary. He told Charlotte that she could be a great child actress on the stage. 7-year-old Mary Pickford's little feet first hit the stage on January 8, 1900, for the Silver King at Toronto's Princess Theatre. And she was an instant hit and had an instant career as a child stage actress. She received $13 for a week of work. Charlotte was pumped to have that little extra worker bringing in some extra money to the household. Ooh, and then it hit her. What's better than one successful child actor? 3 child actors. Just like that, the Smith children's childhoods were ripped away and they spent all their time touring the US with small theatrical companies. Don't get too excited, it's not as cool as it sounds. They were appearing in pretty low-end productions and performing in seedy theaters to even seedier audiences. Mary was negotiating her own deals after just her first bit part in that first play. She became the family's financial director and business negotiator at just 7 years old. And of course, Charlotte had the children far too busy to go to school. So Mary would read. They would have to spend hours upon hours on trains traveling to their next engagements, and Mary would read. She was a pretty shy child, so she kept her nose buried in books in an attempt to avoid interacting with people. Yeah, I've totally done that a time or two. The family was often separated for roles in different productions across the United States, so it could become pretty lonely at times. So Mary, as a pretty small child, was sometimes traveling by train unaccompanied. She was truly living like an adult at the age of 7. When at home base in Toronto, the family shared a home with another show business family, Mary Gish and her daughters Lillian and Dorothy. Lillian, like Mary, would grow up to be a famous silent film star too. In fact, Mary is the one that got her foot in the door in the film industry. In 1906, when Mary was 14 years old, she and her younger brother and sister all got supporting roles in a Broadway musical, a show called Edmund Burke. This was a pretty huge deal after the types of theaters and shows that they had been performing in. Having the childhood she had, by 14, Mary was pretty much a full-fledged adult. She'd always pretty much been an adult. She hadn't wanted to be, but that's the childhood that she was forced into. So when Edmund Burke ended its run on Broadway, Mary decided she wanted to take total control over her career and head out into the world on her own. She really, really wanted to work under Broadway producer David Belasco, so she hounded him with letters and visits until he finally relented and gave her an audition. And because of this persistence, she got a part in the Broadway play The Warrens of Virginia. And one of her co-stars in that play may sound familiar to you, a pre-famous Cecil B. DeMille. This step out of her childhood acting career and into her own life as an independent actress was the moment Gladys Smith officially became known professionally as Mary Pickford. Pickford had been her mother Charlotte's maiden name, and Mary was an Americanized version of her own middle name, Marie. Mother Charlotte was so excited that she changed her name back to Pickford too, and Jack and Lottie's. I think Charlotte just really loved being a stage mom and really wanted that association with what she knew was going to be a future star. By the time Mary was 16 years old, it had become apparent that she was at an awkward stage for theater performances. She had aged out of child parts and was too young for most of the adult parts. She took this transition period as a sign to try something new. The year was 1909, and the world was abuzz with the hot new form of entertainment out there: motion pictures. Just as she had done with Broadway producer David Belasco, Mary put all of her energy into convincing a famed silent film director to give her a chance. D.W. Griffith, who would in a few years direct the highly controversial film The Birth of a Nation. She tracked him down on set and confidently approached him. D.W. Griffith was very taken by her big blue eyes and her beautiful blonde curls, but mostly her confidence. She was offered a screen test on the spot. Griffith later said of his first meeting with Pickford, quote, "She has tremendous driving power in her, the most remarkable talent for self-appraisal. She never kids herself. The thing that most attracted me the day I first saw her was the intelligence that shone in her face. I found she was thirsty for work and information. She could not be driven from the studio while work was going on. She was, and is, a sponge for experience." End quote. D.W. Griffith offered Mary Pickford a film contract with his studio, the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company in Fort Lee, New Jersey. New Jersey was the OG Hollywood. Biograph was primarily making short films that were shown in Nickelodeons during this time. Her contract was $5 per week for 3 days of work each week. This was the standard starting contract pay. But that wasn't good enough for Mary. She knew she was worth more than that. She demanded $10 per week. Remember, Griffith loves her confidence and her drive. He agreed to her demands under one condition. She was never to tell another soul what her salary was because he didn't need his other actors knowing that this newcomer was making double the others. 16-year-old Mary Pickford and 34-year-old D.W. Griffith actually had a lot in common. Both of them had lost their fathers at a very young age and therefore had to become their family's primary breadwinner. And both were forced onto the stage and a life on the tracks traveling to those stages for that very reason. Simply a way to make money for their family. Griffith and Pickford formed an immediate bond and worked very well together. He knew he had something very special in this new actress. Mary later said of their connection, quote, "There is something sacred to me about that camera. Griffith once said to me that he could sit in back of the camera, think something, and I would do it. I think in his way he loved me, and I loved him." End quote. In the beginning of the film industry, they were cranking out silent films left and right. And the thing was, it was such a magical new innovation that audiences didn't really mind if the final product wasn't awesome. They were just so happy to see such a marvel. Mary Pickford appeared in about 45 short films in that first year of 1909 with Griffith. And she took every second at the studio and turned it into a learning opportunity. She wanted to learn everything there was to know about filmmaking, not just acting, the entire process. She had extremely keen senses, and they were all attuned to her surroundings at all times. She listened, she watched, she did. She spent almost all of her time at the studio with Griffith. And remember, she is 16 years old. If you've seen any silent films, you know that the actors' movements and expressions are highly exaggerated. Their speech or noises weren't being captured, so their facial expressions and body movements had to communicate their emotions for them. But Mary Pickford didn't want to be so ridiculously exaggerated. She wanted to be more natural. And along with this, she quickly realized the importance of makeup, camera angles, and lighting. She was a very valuable asset to director D.W. Griffith and his studio, not only for her acting ability, but for her revelation of these technical aspects too. By the end of her first year, she was even writing films. Again, she's a teenager. This young girl that nobody had ever heard of, who came stomping in like she owned the place and demanding a job. And look at her now.
Welcome to the stage where glitter meets grit and every story reveals a little more skin. I'm May December.
And I'm Creme de Violence. Together, we're your hosts for Let's Burlesque, the podcast that peels back the layers of the dazzling world of burlesque.
Each week, we trade stories. I read to Creme.
And I read to May. From backstage mishaps to glorious triumphs, we reveal what really happens behind the curtain.
We dive deep into the world of burlesque. From backstage secrets to the wildest performances, nothing is off limits. And honey, we're bringing you tales as tantalizing as a feather fan dance.
So pour yourself a cocktail, slip into something comfortable, and join us for Let's Burlesque podcast, because behind every sequin, there is a story.
And we're here to tell them all. And the best part, you never know who might drop by. Performers, producers, and all the backstage gossip you didn't know you needed.
Subscribe now, and let's make every listen a little striptease for your ears.
Only on Let's Burlesque podcast. Available wherever you listen to your podcasts.
A year or so before Mary Pickford entered the movie scene, the Nestor Film Company of New Jersey had gotten sick of the unpredictable weather on the East Coast and moved all the way over to the other side of the country in a little area outside of Los Angeles called Hollywood. And word spread really fast back east at how amazing this new place was. No snowstorms, no hurricanes, very little rain, and stunning natural beauty. And so much undeveloped land. Well, one final New Jersey blizzard in 1910 pushed D.W. Griffith over the edge when it delayed filming by an entire week. So he was ready to check out this little spot in California. They packed up and planned to stay for 4 months. Bye-bye, New Jersey. Griffith, Pickford, and about 40 others from the studio arrived in Hollywood right around the new year of 1910. There were only about 150 or 200 residents of Hollywood when they arrived. One of those 40 people who made the journey was actually Mary's 14-year-old little brother, Jack. Charlotte thought 17-year-old Mary should be responsible for him for a while. And with this new beginning in Hollywood, Mary Pickford became D.W. Griffith's main star, his biograph girl. Biographer Eileen Whitfield described Mary Pickford perfectly. Quote, "She played incredibly nuanced, tender, loving, and yet violent, bossy, touching, and yet hilariously funny, young, and yet old characters. This was the woman on screen that the public embraced. We don't have images of women like that very much anymore. We don't have anything like the variety of women that Mary Pickford played. You would need to take 50 Hollywood actresses and put them together to get an image as rich and as nuanced as Mary Pickford had." End quote. I would just like to add to this that of all those character descriptions Eileen described, sometimes you would see several of those in one single scene. Funny, touching, loving, and then bam, bossy or violent. And she was still writing scripts too, not only for Biograph, but for other studios. Each script earned her $10 to $15, which today would be about $350 to $500. That doesn't seem like enough to me, but most of these scripts were pretty short and pretty basic, I think. Either way, Mary saved every penny she could during her time in Hollywood, so by the time the crew returned to the East Coast in April, she had quite a little nest egg. Mary said of her little brother Jack's time in LA, quote, "By the time he left Los Angeles, Jack, at 14, was well educated in whiskey and women," end quote. Growing up fast was in the cards for all of the Pickford children, I guess. Mary fell in love for the first time right after she returned to New Jersey, and her mother was not happy about it. Because the man, a fellow actor named Owen Moore, was a philandering alcoholic. And Charlotte had quite a bit of experience living among alcoholism. So, as any teenage girl would do, Mary just kept her spicy little relationship with Owen top secret from her mom. And even though Owen was known for his womanizing ways, he was really pressuring Mary to marry him. And he succeeded. Owen and Mary secretly got married in a courthouse ceremony in January of 1911. 18-year-old Mary Pickford was now a married woman. Meanwhile, Mary's fame was rising fast, and other studios wanted her talent in their arsenal. And the Independent Motion Picture Company gave her an offer she couldn't refuse. $170 per week, or $5,800 per week in today's money. Not bad for 18 years old. Plus, part of the offer was a place in the company for Mary's entire family, too. Charlotte, Jack, and Lottie. And Owen was also under contract with IMP, so she'd get to work alongside her new husband. She had really appreciated her time with D.W. Griffith and Biograph, but she wanted to expand further than she thought she could under his leadership. He was set in his ways and didn't really have much room for growth, especially for a woman. Mary respected him as a director, but wanted to spread her wings and grow her knowledge and expertise. She later said of Griffith, quote, "He was too much of a great master, which, of course, I never accepted. I respected him, yes, and I even had affection for him. But when he told me to do things I didn't believe in, I wouldn't do them," end quote. Mary Pickford was not your standard good little obeying woman like was expected of the time. IMP wasn't super beloved in the New Jersey film world because, like they'd done with Mary, they were known for stealing stars away from other studios. And this made a lot of people very angry. So they decided to pack up and head out of town. But not to Hollywood. They were going to Havana, Cuba. And it was on the ship to Havana where Charlotte learned of her daughter's marriage when she caught her making out with Owen. Charlotte spent the voyage alternating between yelling and sobbing. And when they arrived in Havana, Charlotte forbade them from sharing a room. I mean, she was the one who forced her daughter to become an adult when she was 6 years old, so what does she really expect now? Mary said, quote, "What was to be a long-delayed honeymoon was more like a funeral," end quote. Sounds like a blast. This little honeymoon also showed Mary just what her mother was trying to warn her about. Owen was wasted all the time and pretty controlling of her life. Needless to say, he did not get along with his new in-laws, and that can create a pretty uncomfortable existence for the one stuck in the middle. Poor Mary. Well, Mary still chose her new husband. After about a month in Cuba, Mary and Owen sailed off at dawn one morning, leaving her mother and siblings behind. Charlotte was pissed when she discovered they had taken off, and of course she packed herself, Lottie, and Jack up and chased after them. Mary and Owen were already living together in a small New York apartment by the time Charlotte found them. Man, she would have really loved to have GPS tracker technology, wouldn't she? Mary was whisked away once again by another studio and offered even more money. She was a hot commodity. The Majestic Motion Picture Company, what a name, lured her away from IMP in the fall of 1911 for a whopping $225 per week, plus a place for Owen as well. But she was still under contract with IMP, so they slapped her with a lawsuit. But in the early 20th century, the legal adult age was 21, not 18. So the lawsuit was dropped once it was pointed out that Mary Pickford was a minor when she signed her contract with IMP. Mary didn't stay with Majestic for very long. She realized in all of the studio hopping that she really missed D.W. Griffith and the studio that had made her a star, Biograph. She took a huge pay cut to return to her home studio. And she left Owen behind at Majestic. Neither their professional or personal relationship was doing so hot. Maybe Charlotte knew what she was talking about after all. Mary Pickford was by now known as the Queen of the Movies. After a short time back with Griffith, though, she still felt unsettled. What she really wanted was to return to the stage. So, with Griffith's blessing, she returned to the man who had given her her big break on Broadway, David Belasco. The long-running production of A Good Little Devil led to Mary's next business venture. Film director Adolf Zukor caught a few of her performances and wanted her and the play for a new movie company he had just formed, Famous Players. His mission was to make movies of stage plays. He secured the rights to the play, and then he secured Mary. She told Zukor, quote, "You know, for years I've dreamed of making $20,000 a year before I was 20, and I'll be 20 very soon," end quote. And that was that. She was such a good investment to Zukor that before long, that $20,000 per year was a whopping $100,000 per year. That's over $3 million today. Mary Pickford knew her worth, and she was a keen negotiator. Mary and I think Owen moved back to Hollywood with Zukor and Famous Players in 1914, and she was immediately the #1 leading lady in Hollywood. But her marriage to Owen was clearly not one that would stand the test of time. He was drunk all the time, and he was a mean drunk. And Mary was not going to put up with that for the rest of her life. The two quietly separated in 1915, trying to avoid a public divorce. Again, Mary Pickford was a very keen negotiator, and here's an example of one negotiation she secured that really benefited her. It was commonplace for film distributors to sell packages of films. So if theaters were seeking the hottest Mary Pickford film to show, they couldn't just purchase that one film. They would have to purchase a whole package of films to get just that one. And the other films were usually much less sought after. It was called block booking. Well, Mary Pickford didn't really like this method of film distribution. She wanted her films to be distributed separately, so she negotiated a deal that would achieve just that. In the deal, she secured 50% profit of all of her films, guaranteeing a minimum of just over $1 million over a 2-year period that would be issued in weekly payments of $10,000. At this time, the average annual salary in the United States was $750 per year. And Mary Pickford had negotiated a $10,000 per week salary for herself. Not only that, but she received a $300,000 signing bonus with the deal and a bunch of other sweet perks. Never one to settle for just okay, Mary wanted more out of her professional career. She'd acted on stage, she'd perfected the image of a screen actress, she'd written scripts, she'd negotiated deals. What's next? Producing. She wanted to produce films. She wanted to be more than the puppet on the screen. She wanted to create the magic. Mary Pickford's first movie as a film producer was The Foundling in 1916. She was 24 years old. Sam Goldwyn, the G of MGM, wrote in 1923, quote, "There is no detail of film production which she, this girl, still in her early 20s, had not grasped more thoroughly than any man to whom I have ever talked. She knew pictures not only from the standpoint of the studio, but from that of the box office. Back of those lovely brown eyes, disguised by that lyric profile, is the mind of a captain of the industry." End quote. Theater star, check. Film star, check. Writer, check. Producer, check. Now what? Here's what. 24-year-old Mary Pickford began her very own film company, the Mary Pickford Film Corporation. This move was also negotiated within her contract with famous players, her own production company. She was a professional woman in a man's world, and that didn't frighten her one bit. The United States of America entered World War I in 1917, and the entire country's focus became centered around the war, even Hollywood. Mary put in overtime using her fame and wealth to support the war effort. She joined other actors and actresses touring the U.S. selling war bonds and doing public appearances. She even cut off a section of her famous long, beautiful curls to be sold at auction. And one lucky person acquired that lock of Mary Pickford's hair for $15,000. In 1918, she became vice president of the newly founded Motion Picture War Service Association. She was so beloved on the war morale trail that she was made an honorary colonel by the U.S. Army and coined the official Little Sister of the U.S. Navy. Why Little Sister at the age of 24 and after being a sharp-minded pioneer in the film industry? Because the tiny 5-foot-tall Mary Pickford was known for playing childlike, very youthful characters on screen. As an example, she was 24 years old when she played a 10-year-old girl in The Poor Little Rich Girl in 1917. This wasn't as uncommon as you might think. There were several young adult women who played children both on stage and in silent films. Shorter actresses like Mary Pickford were often paired with tall actors and actresses to make them look even more juvenile and smaller. Oversized furniture and props were also sometimes used to make them appear smaller. Now, I can't help but look at this from a child development standpoint. I assume being robbed of her actual childhood had a huge part to do with her clinging to a childhood in her roles. As we've heard from so many other actors, their art is a tool to escape the realities of life, a step into a fantasy world. With Mary never being able to experience a real childhood, she could do it through her art. Well, kind of. Whatever the reason, people have had widely varied opinions on it for over 100 years now. According to Mary, quote, "I was forced to live far beyond my years when I was just a child. Now I have reversed the order and I intend to remain young indefinitely," end quote. Mary starred alongside a dashing actor about 9 years her senior named Douglas Fairbanks in 1917, and she really liked him. And the best part of this hot new guy? He didn't drink. He was a complete teetotaler. They quickly began a quiet romance, really quiet because they were both still married. On February 5th, 1919, 26-year-old Mary Pickford officially became the most powerful woman in the film industry when she teamed up with Douglas Fairbanks, D.W. Griffith, and Charlie Chaplin to found their own film production and distribution company, United Artists. Their mission as film artists themselves was to create a company in which actors and directors were able to have a little more financial and artistic freedom rather than being so dependent on the traditional film studios. Within 5 years, United Artists had on board Samuel Goldwyn, Howard Hughes, Buster Keaton, and Joseph Schenck, future head of 20th Century. United Artists not only produced films, but they bought and built theaters under the UA name, something that would become commonplace with the studios of the Golden Age. And then they went international, having operations in both Canada and Mexico, and then further. By the end of the 1930s, United Artists was represented in over 40 countries worldwide. Mary was clearly the queen of United Artists. UA actor Adolphe Menjou said, quote, "Mary had her own company, and when I say it was her company, I mean she ran the show. Everything had to pass her personal inspection. Pickford was on the set from 6 in the morning until 9 at night, and then she stayed to write all the checks and give the orders for the next day," end quote. Adding to that, director Ernest Lubitsch said, quote, "She can dictate policies, handle finances, bargain with supporting players, attend to booking problems, and still keep her mind on acting. It is no wonder that she held her place at the top longer than any personality in motion pictures," end quote. Not bad for a woman, huh? Mary Pickford, a woman in her 20s, was a business mogul in 19-teens America. How cool is that? Of course, she's not content with that success. She wanted to use her power and resources to help others. In 1921, Mary co-founded the Motion Picture Relief Fund, financing the fund at its start with her own money. The mission of the program was to financially assist actors and film professionals who were out of work and struggling. The Motion Picture Relief Fund would eventually open the Motion Picture Country Home in 1942 and the Motion Picture Hospital in 1948. Mary Pickford's Motion Picture Relief Fund is still active today, 104 years later. Today it is called the Motion Picture and Television Fund. Pretty amazing. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks finally decided that divorcing their spouses was worth the risk of scandal, and they were finally able to marry each other on March 28, 1920. They were the king and queen of Hollywood. They were the very first Hollywood super couple. 1927 brought the birth of talking films, and this, of course, was the beginning of a grand film career for many and the death of a career for many others. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks thought it was just a passing fad. Mary wasn't wrong about much, but boy, was she wrong about that. D.W. Griffith shared their feelings. He said, quote, "Speaking movies are impossible. When a century has passed, all thoughts of our so-called talking pictures will be abandoned," end quote. Well, here we are almost a century later, and I don't think we're going back to silent films anytime soon. Mary's mother, Charlotte, was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1928, and she passed away soon after. This loss was very hard on Mary. The following year, 1929, marked Mary Pickford's first talking film, Coquette. Not only was she showcasing her voice on screen for the first time, but she was also showcasing a new look. She had cut off her long curly locks in exchange for a trendy short bob and accompanying flapper style. There were a lot of people who were not happy with her for cutting off her famous hair. The Academy of Motion Picture Artists was founded in 1929, and Mary Pickford was one of the founding members of the Academy, aka the Academy Awards, the Oscars. Mary Pickford became the recipient of the second Best Actress Academy Award for her performance in Coquette. Hollywood was shifting now, and moviegoers were looking for new experiences at the theater now that we're into the 1930s, an extremely exciting time in motion pictures. Mary Pickford's fame was being replaced by new, younger, more glamorous stars on the scene. Mary Pickford's last movie was in 1933, a movie called Secrets. After starring in just 4 talking films, she decided to retire from acting. 1933 also marked the end of her marriage to Douglas Fairbanks after 13 years of marriage. They separated that year and were officially divorced 3 years later. They would still remain somewhat in each other's lives until Fairbanks' death, and it was said that he forever felt the regret of the end of their relationship. It was the close of a big, thick chapter of Mary Pickford's life. Douglas Fairbanks died at the age of 56, just 6 years after his separation from Mary Pickford. Sadly, Mary's first husband, Owen Moore, died just 6 months before Douglas Fairbanks' passing. This was a very difficult time for Mary Pickford, but she was still devoting much of her time and resources to helping others. In 1932, she created a program called the Payroll Pledge Program. This was a type of retirement savings plan for studio workers, primarily focusing on the lower-paid employees. She also devoted a ton of time and money to local orphanages and to the Jewish Home for the Aging. She gave to the American Cancer Society, the Salvation Army, the Arthritis Foundation, the YMCA, plus many hospitals, colleges, and children's charities. And she wasn't doing this for publicity. She was helping others because she wanted to help others. She had a good heart. Mary also held a lot of responsibility for the beginning of the Library of Congress Film Library. Today, 156 of Mary Pickford's films are preserved at the library. She was an early activist in the preservation of Hollywood history. And, as if we could expect anything less, Mary Pickford was also heavily involved in the women's rights movement. She was a very active member of the National Women's Party and spoke to groups of women all over the nation about female leadership. During a speech at the Women's National Press Club, she said, quote, "Until women citizens share in democracy to the same extent men enjoy it, our democracy is not complete." End quote. Despite all of the incredible things she had accomplished as a woman in the first decades of 20th century America, the end of her acting career and her marriage sent the press on a rampage. Mary Pickford was accused of getting what she deserved for trying to do a man's work instead of being in the home cooking and caring for her husband. She was accused of making poor life choices and suffering the consequences of them now with the end of her acting career and marriage. She became a, quote, cautionary tale for working women. It was written that, at 42 years old, Mary Pickford's life was over. That any dreams of future success or happiness was hopeless. It's important to note that many women of this time were anti-women's movement. Many women believed that their role in this world was to care for a husband, a home, and a handful of children. That they were to be subservient and exist to please men and make babies. This was heavily ingrained in women's psyche. So these, quote, radical feminists like Mary Pickford were seen as an outrage to the sex by many women in the U.S. These criticisms didn't help the already emotionally struggling Mary Pickford. Just imagine what she was going through. She had been working since she was a small child. This was her life. She had been acting her entire life. And then to say goodbye to that life at the same time your marriage is ending, and then that man dies, leaving her with so many what-ifs. That is a lot of emotional turmoil to navigate through. In 1936, Mary debuted a weekly radio show called Parties at Pickfair that aired for 5 months. The premise of the show was conversations and performances by celebrity guests which took place in her famous home, Pickfair. I listened to the February 25th, 1936 episode, which featured Ginger Rogers, Cesar Romero, and Charles Butterworth, and it was highly entertaining. same year as her radio show aired, Mary Pickford's younger sister Lottie passed away at the young age of 43 years old. On the bright side, though, Mary found love again in 1937. Well, she had actually found it several years earlier, but that year, 45-year-old Mary Pickford married her beau, 33-year-old actor Buddy Rogers. 6 years into their marriage, when Mary was 51 years old, they adopted a 6-year-old little boy named Ronnie. Then a year later, a little baby girl named Roxanne, who was still an infant when they adopted her. Motherhood didn't really provide Mary with the love and excitement she had expected, so she quickly hired nannies and handed over the duties of caring for the children to them. And then once they were old enough, they were sent off to boarding school. Remember, she didn't have a childhood, so she had absolutely nothing to go from. Her own mother was very unconventional, and Mary's childhood was that of a working adult. So she just really had no idea what to do with children. She was seeking something when she adopted them, but it turned out she didn't get what she was looking for. In the late 1950s, Mary began a several years-long project in being a key figure in the planning of the Hollywood Museum. And she also became the chairwoman of the Los Angeles County Motion Picture Committee. The Hollywood Museum opened in 1963. Mary also established the Mary Pickford Foundation during the 1950s, which she set up to receive a huge portion of her estate upon her death. To date, the foundation has dispersed over $18 million to various charitable organizations and maintains $8 million in endowments at 20 different colleges throughout the nation. The foundation also assists the Motion Picture and Television Fund to this day, which Mary Pickford co-founded. And in 1960, Mary Pickford was chosen to be a California delegate for the White House Conference on Aging, stemming from her years-long involvement with care and support for elderly citizens of the United States. Mary and Buddy lived a quiet life, but Mary would remain very active in her philanthropic causes and various committees throughout her later years. Mary Pickford received quite an honor in 1976 when she was 84 years old. An Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement. She wasn't well enough to attend the ceremony, but she did sit for an interview in her home where she was presented the award. As she was presented the statue, she said with tears in her eyes, "I shall treasure it always." The press had a field day with this presentation at Pickfair because guess what? Mary Pickford looked like an 84-year-old woman. Because she was an 84-year-old woman. I thought she looked beautiful. Well, how dare America's sweetheart age like a normal mortal? That kind of thing drives me nuts. One critic wrote, quote, "Mary Pickford, the one-time screen darling of America, has managed to offend people. She did it by growing old," end quote. Mary Pickford suffered a cerebral hemorrhage in 1979, just like her father. The amazing film star, feminist, business mogul, and philanthropist was dead at the age of 87. An unbelievably astounding life filled with more accomplishments than 100 of us could do. Her estate was valued at $50 million at the time of her death in 1979, a large majority of it going to her foundation to continue her passion in helping others. Now, I would like to share some other interesting things I learned about the remarkable Mary Pickford during my research. Bullet point number 1. Because of her shrewd business mind and mad negotiating skills, Mary Pickford was the first movie actress to receive a percentage of her film's earnings. Bullet point number 2. On April 30th, 1927, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were the first movie stars to place their handprints and footprints in the cement at Grauman's Chinese Theater. The first official prints, I should say. Legend is that Norma Talmadge was the first when she accidentally walked onto the wet cement at the theater prior to its opening. Bullet point number 3. Mary Pickford was Joan Crawford's mother-in-law for the 4 years Douglas Fairbanks' son, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., was married to Crawford. Mary Pickford was 37 and Joan Crawford was 23 at the time of the union that tied them as in-laws. Bullet point number 4. At the 1953 Academy Awards ceremony, Mary Pickford presented Cecil B. DeMille with the Best Picture Oscar for The Greatest Show on Earth. This was monumental for many reasons, but a couple of them were that this was the first Academy Awards ceremony ever televised, and it was the first time Mary Pickford ever appeared on television. And remember, the two of them had appeared together in Mary's very first Broadway play when she was 14 years old. Bullet point number 5. Mary Pickford's beloved mansion, Pickfair, was named by joining the names Pickford and Fairbanks. They moved there when they got married, and Mary lived there for the rest of her life. Her husband, Buddy Rogers, sold the home to LA Lakers owner Dr. Jerry Buss 10 months after Mary's passing for $5,362,000. That would adjust to about $20.5 million today. The mansion is now owned by Unicom International and is used for corporate events and retreats. Just a couple things I learned from their website. The mansion was originally built in 1919 as a huge, fancy hunting lodge. Just a year later, Douglas Fairbanks purchased it as a wedding present for his new bride, and the couple renovated it into a private home with 22 rooms. It's gone through a few more major renovations since then, too. While under ownership of Mary Pickford, the home saw tons of icons grace its presence. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Albert Einstein, Babe Ruth, Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, the Crown Prince of Japan, and all of the who's who of the Hollywood film industry. Will Rogers once said that his biggest job as the mayor of Beverly Hills was to direct people to the home of Mary Pickford. And finally, Pickfair is believed to have been the first private property in Los Angeles to have a swimming pool. Bullet point number 6. Mary Pickford had dual citizenship, Canada and the United States. Bullet point number 7. I want to share a quote I stumbled upon by Mary Pickford because I think it's a powerful message about achieving success. Quote, "You may have a fresh start at any moment you choose. For this thing that we call failure is not the falling down, but the staying down." End quote. Tuck that little quote in your pocket. I think we can all use that piece of advice at one point or another in our lives. In conclusion, Mary Pickford lived such an extraordinary life and accomplished so much. She worked her butt off to achieve every single thing she set out to achieve. She rose to success and fame in a time where women simply did not have professional lives. They were expected to keep a home and a family and never chase any dreams that they may hold in their heart. But Mary Pickford wasn't your ordinary woman. She was forced into a life of adulthood at just 6 years old. While she should have been playing with other neighborhood children, she was raising her younger siblings, handling the family's finances, and helping to support the family by traveling the country to perform in stage productions. She had to be tough from the start, and that strength and determination accompanied her throughout her life and all of her great success. The most inspiring part of Mary Pickford's life, in my opinion, is her courage to stand up and speak on the behalf of women's rights, and her extraordinary generosity in sharing not only her wealth but her time with individuals not as fortunate as she was. She was involved in so many different charities and causes, and she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty by helping with more than just her pocketbook. In a male-dominated world, Mary Pickford confidently marched in and built the career she wanted to. The men in charge often tried to hold her back or diminish her position, but she stood tall, all 5 feet of her, and held her ground. She was told time and time again to be a good girl and do as she's told. But she showed those men just how talented and intelligent she was. America's little sweetheart could fight in the business world just as tough as the men from the good old boys club. Mary Pickford was such an inspiration to women everywhere. She still is, probably more so today. Many women of her time fought back against her radical feminism. But looking back from today, we can see how truly remarkable that little spitfire of a woman was and how much she contributed to women's equality. She was a true trailblazer. Thank you, Mary Pickford, for showing us what hard work and determination can get us. I am a firm believer in not sitting back and waiting for greatness to find you. That hard work really does pay off. And you really prove that to us through your story. Thank you for reminding us that we should reach out and help others as much as we are able. And thank you for being a role model to women everywhere, even over a century later. And thank you all for listening. If you would like to support the show and receive a little bonus content, head on over to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to check out what's available there. And as always, I would love it if you could give a 5-star rating and a positive review where you listen to your podcasts. My primary source for this episode was a book titled Mary Pickford, Queen of the Movies by Christel Schmidt. I also used a book titled American Legends, The Life of Mary Pickford by Charles River Editors, marypickford.org, eden.com, and IMDB.